Kelly and I usually don't take a break, but we are taking this week off, so we thought on this episode we would share with you one of our bonus casts that are reserved for just our executive producers. It gives you a feel of the extra content that we put out there. If you would like to get this extra content, you can start out at just $2 a month, and you get at least one bonus episode every single month. At $5 and above, you get all of it. This bonus cast features number 10 Downing Street over in Britain. We hope you enjoy, and we'll see you next week. History Goes Bump Bonus Cast. Hello, you spooktacular people. Welcome to History Goes Bump Bonus Cast number 319. Number 10 Downing Street is the most famous address in British politics. This is the home of the British Prime Minister. The building is 300 years old and was not a place where many early prime ministers wanted to live. It wasn't fancy, and for many years it was downright dangerous due to its shoddy construction. Today it is much better and has been the backdrop to many famous historic events. It also is home to several spirits. The British just refer to it as number 10. The 300-year-old building is on Downing Street, just off Whitehall in the city of Westminster, London. Number 10 contains around 100 rooms. A private residence for the Prime Minister occupies the third floor, and then there's a kitchen in the basement. The other floors have offices and conference rooms, reception rooms, and even some dining rooms. Governmental ministers, national leaders, and foreign dignitaries usually meet with the Prime Minister in some of these reception and sitting rooms. At the rear is an interior courtyard and a terrace overlooking a half-acre garden. Number 10 is approximately 3/4 of a mile from Buckingham Palace, which is the London residence of the British monarch. And so that makes it easy for the Prime Minister to have meetings with before the Queen and now the King. Also nearby is the Palace of Westminster, which is the meeting place of both Houses of Parliament. This was originally 3 properties: a mansion overlooking St. James Park, which was called the House at the Back, a townhouse behind it, and then a cottage. The townhouse from which the modern building gets its name was one of several built by George Downing, and it was built between 1682 and 1684. And the street that it's on, of course, was named for him, Downing Street. There had been a mansion here before called Hampden House, and that had been taken down, and then they built this in its place. Officially, Downing was a soldier and a diplomat. He served under Oliver Cromwell and King Charles II, but he also was a notorious spy. He invested in properties and acquired considerable wealth, and although he was wealthy, he wasn't very good about building stuff. Most of the things that he constructed were shoddily built, and they were put on top of light foundations. So he made record profits, which helped him to get richer and richer, while he's building some of these locations that aren't so good. As a matter of fact, Sir Winston Churchill, who had lived in number 10, said that number 10 was shaky and lightly built by the profiteering contractor whose name they bear. So the largest of the 3 houses was called House at the Back. It was combined to make number 10, and it had been a mansion that was built in about 1530 next to Whitehall Palace. It was rebuilt, expanded, and renovated many times, and had originally been one of several buildings that had made up something called the Cockpit Lodgings. And they were called this because they were attached to an octagonal structure used for cockfighting. Early in the 17th century, the cockpit was converted to a concert hall and theater, a much better use for it. This was sometime after 1688. And a lot of early cabinet meetings were held here secretly. So it already was dipping its toe into politics back then. For many years, the house at the back was the home of Thomas Knevet, keeper of Whitehall Palace, who was famous for capturing Guy Fawkes in 1605 and foiling his plot to assassinate King James I. After that time, the house at the back was usually occupied by members of the royal family or the government. Johann Caspar von Bothmer was the premier minister of the Electorate of Hanover, and he was head of the German Chancery and advisor to George I and II, and he took up residency in 1720. And long before Winston Churchill ever made his comments about how shaky and lightly built the house was, this man was complaining about the ruinous condition of the premises. He lived there until his death in 1732. It was after this time that number 10 was offered to Robert Walpole by King George II in 1732. Walpole accepted on the condition that the gift was to the office of First Lord of the Treasury. The post of First Lord of the Treasury has for much of the 18th and 19th centuries been held by the Prime Minister. Walpole hired a man named William Kent to join the three houses to make it into this larger house that is now known as number 10 Downing Street. Despite it being bigger now and having this very convenient location to Parliament, there were a lot of prime ministers who didn't want to live here. And again, it's because it really was neglected, it was very costly to maintain, and most of the time just was very run down. As a matter of fact, it was scheduled for demolition several times, but the property always survived, and then it became linked with so many historical events and statesmen that it would be a crime to tear this thing down now. In 1985, Margaret Thatcher said of number 10 that it had become, quote, one of the most precious jewels in the national heritage. A lot of these early prime ministers also didn't feel that number 10 was very impressive. You know, if you're the leader of the government, shouldn't you have a really impressive place to live? And so they didn't want to live there either. Over the years, it continued to become more dilapidated and actually got to a point where it was a hazardous place even to live. It was prone to sinking because it was built on soft soil and had this shallow foundation. Eventually, the floors started buckling, the walls buckled as well, and the chimneys cracked. Frequent repairs were done, but it still kept falling apart. As a matter of fact, back in 1766, Charles Townshend pointed out that the house was in a dilapidated condition. His architect's letter to the Treasury said, "We have caused the house in Downing Street belonging to the Treasury to be surveyed and find the walls of the old part of the said house next to the street to be much decayed, the floors and chimneys much sunk from the level." So Townshend ordered extensive repairs, and even after 8 years of working on them, they still were incomplete because every time they would start fixing something, something else would break, then the thing that they had fixed would break again. It just continued on and on. A note from Lord North to the Office of Works dated September 1774 asked that the work on the front of the house, which was begun by a warrant from the Treasury back in August of 1766, be finished. Finally, the Treasury started complaining that the repairs on number 10 were just getting to be too much, and they started suggesting that it be raised. And hey, why don't we put up a new house that's built better or build something somewhere else? 1782, the Board of Works reported on the dangerous state of the old part of the house and that no time be lost in taking down said building. In the 1950s, a major renovation was undertaken. This new foundation was made of steel reinforced concrete with piling sunk 6 to 18 feet. And they replaced so much in number 10 that about 60% of it was new materials, and the remaining 40% was either restored or replicas of the originals. Many rooms and sections of the new building were reconstructed exactly as they had been in number 10 for all the previous decades and centuries, actually. These included the garden floor, the door and entrance foyer, the stairway, the hallway to the cabinet room, the garden and terrace, the small and large staterooms, and the 3 reception rooms. The staircase was rebuilt and simplified. Steel was hidden inside the columns in the pillared drawing room to support the floor above. The upper floors were modernized, and the 3rd floor extended over numbers 11 and 12 to allow more living space. As many as 40 coats of paint were stripped from the walls, and these revealed details that hadn't been seen in almost 200 years. And something interesting that happened while they were doing the restoration is they were examining the exterior facade, and they discovered that the black color visible even in photographs from the mid-19th century was misleading. As they were stripping stuff off of there, they found out that the bricks were actually yellow. The black appearance was the product of 2 centuries of soot, basically. So it was pollution that had made the bricks look black. To preserve the traditional look of recent times, the newly cleaned yellow bricks were painted black to resemble their well-known appearance. I just find that hilarious. So they were completely dirty and disgusting, and they painted them black so that they would continue to look that way, I guess. This reconstruction was considered an architectural triumph, but the man who had worked on the reconstruction, Erith, was very disappointed. He complained openly that during and after the project, the government kept altering his design to save money, and he was heartbroken by the result. He said the whole project has been a frightful waste of money because it just has not been done properly. The Ministry of Works has insisted on economy after economy. I am bitterly disappointed with what has happened. And he pointed to the numbers on the front of the facade, which were intended to be based on historical models, and he said, "This is a mess. It's completely wrong. I hate it." And eventually, his concerns proved to be justified, because despite spending all this money, doing all of this wonderful reconstruction, within a few years, dry rot was discovered, especially in the main rooms due to inadequate waterproofing and a broken water pipe. This is why you don't just sit there and say, let's save as much money as we can. Sometimes you need to spend more money to get something quality done. So an extensive reconstruction had to be done again in the late 1960s. And then when Margaret Thatcher was in office, she also commissioned more remodeling. This was completed in the 1980s under an associate of heiress named Quinlan Terry. Some of the later prime ministers weren't real happy with number 10, not because of its poor construction, because now it's got much better construction. They had large families. And this isn't a very big place. Even though they've put these three buildings together, it's still not big enough. Tony Blair and David Cameron chose to live in the private residence above number 11 rather than the smaller one above number 10. In 2010, the Camerons completely modernized the 50-year-old private kitchen in number 11, and in March 2020, Prime Minister Boris Johnson refurbished the residential apartment at number 11. And apparently that became the subject of some public controversy, especially when it came to financing that refurbishment. And then more recently, here in May 2023, a car was driven into the Downing Street gates. The Prime Minister was inside at the time. A man was arrested by police, and the car crash was not considered terrorist-related. I'm not sure if the guy had been drinking. I'm not sure what happened there. Today, the Prime Minister is Rishi Sunak, and 10 Downing Street houses the UK Cabinet Room, in which cabinet meetings take place, chaired by the Prime Minister. And it also houses the Prime Minister's Executive Office, which deals with government logistics and diplomacy. And not surprisingly, Downing Street, it's been here for over 300 years. It is very active spiritually. One ghost is said to appear regularly when the nation is facing an emergency. This apparition always appears in fancy Regency period costume, and it's said to be the ghost of a former Prime Minister, Spencer Perceval. Perceval became Prime Minister in 1809, and I don't know how he was in real life, but as a spirit, he is described as being rather cold and unfriendly. He was the only Prime Minister to have been assassinated, and maybe that's why the spirit comes off that way. And now a little break for a word about one of our sponsors. A man named John Bellingham shot him in the chest as he walked into the lobby of the House of Commons on May 11, 1812. His body was brought back to number 10, where it laid in state for 5 days. While all those extensive renovations were being done in the 1950s and the 1960s, workmen said that they encountered that ghost several times. On one occasion, his shimmering shade was even seen in the garden, crossing towards the wall that backed onto the Horse Guards parade, and then he just disappeared. Another apparition here is said to be a lady who appears in a long dress. She always has this magnificent set of pearls that she wears around her neck. She likes to haunt the pillared drawing room. Today, that is used for official functions and the signing of international agreements. Several people who have worked in the neighboring offices have reported both seeing and hearing her. Policemen on guard duty have heard ghostly footsteps plodding their way around the building, although they can never find anyone in the vicinity when they go to investigate the sound. The basement is said to be haunted by a little girl. She likes to take the hand of anyone walking around down there. It's also where several employees have reported the overpowering strong odor of cigar smoke wafting around the rooms. Some people believe that that's probably the spirit of Winston Churchill hanging out, because he liked to smoke his cigars there. There was a man who worked here named David, and several years ago he wrote about an experience that he had. He worked in facilities management. He said, "I joined number 10 in the year 2000, and I would normally describe myself as someone who doesn't believe in the supernatural, but this is what happened in the small dining room shortly after I started. We were doing a recruitment exercise for a new member of staff, and I'd booked the small dining room to do that interview. I arrived very early, about 6 o'clock in the morning, and rather than going straight to my office, I walked up to the dining room just to check the table and chairs were positioned correctly. The early hour meant the room was in total darkness. With no natural light coming from the windows, and that I hadn't switched the electric lights on inside the room, I was relying on the wash of light from behind me in the service corridor and just stuck my head in the room. I was immediately conscious of some light from underneath the doors that go through to the state dining room, and knowing we'd had a couple of incidents of lights being left on overnight, I moved into the room to check this. As I crossed the small dining room to the two large doors that open up into the state dining room, I passed the end of the table and absolutely jumped out of my skin because someone walked past me. I'm talking about a space of a couple of feet, but because of the darkness, I hadn't seen the person. On spinning around, the light from the door I'd entered through showed I was on my own. What really got my attention was that I heard the sound of a taffeta dress moving or rustling, and without wishing to sound dramatic, definitely felt a presence. Nothing malicious or otherwise, but it definitely felt like someone was with me. So about 2 hours later, I was joined by one of my colleagues, and still buzzing with the early experience, related this to him, to which he said, "Oh, you've seen the ghost." And I responded, "Yeah, right, what ghost?" He then proceeded to tell me that there is a lady in a white ball gown who goes between the state dining room and the pillared room. With a short period of time I'd worked at number 10, this was news to me. And as I said, I'm the kind of person who's skeptical of this kind of thing without some kind of evidence, except that it happened to me. I can't explain it. It's something I don't often relate to people because it still sends shivers up my spine. Since then, I've read up in a few London ghost books. It's all mentioned, so maybe, just maybe, I've met the lady in white. The following week, I made a point of coming down to the staterooms after evening receptions when the lights were off to try and recreate the moment. And here I am, 13 years later, and I haven't had any further contact. That's amazing, 13 years, and he never felt or saw or anything again. Guess she just wanted to say hi once. And then Prime Minister David Cameron claimed that number 10 Downing Street was haunted by the spirit of a sad middle-aged man. And these claims were substantiated by the release of some disturbing night vision footage. Cameron said, "I have the evidence that number 10 is haunted." The ghost, who Cameron and family have nicknamed Clegg, was captured on night vision cameras after Cameron, 45, began to notice small things amiss in his house. "Things would go missing or get moved around," said Cameron. "I'd hear odd noises in the middle of the night, but when I got up to check them out, the door would be locked and the windows were tightly shut. Sometimes I'd hear this ghastly sobbing sound." After nearly 18 months of strange incidents, Cameron set up a series of night vision spy cameras around the house. What he saw when he replayed the footage shocked him. The specter of a middle-aged man half-heartedly gives a speech about Europe in the number 10 kitchen, throws some brie from the fridge across the room, guess he didn't like it, then walks through the wall. "Apparently, when your career dies a horrible death, you are destined to spend eternity roaming the place in which you felt you belonged," said Cameron. "It's chilling to think this apparition is in my home, silently watching me sleep." I'm going to use other words than what he used. "Poop, shower, and make love to his wife." He used some other words there, but I cleaned it up for you guys. So wow, you have a prime minister who not only claimed that the place was haunted, but seemed to catch some kind of activity on a camera. I need to find this footage somewhere. If I do, I'll try to post it somewhere. So what a great place. I mean, number 10 Downing Street is like our White House here. Lots of history there. The White House is said to be quite haunted. Is number 10 Downing Street haunted? That is for you to decide. Thanks so much for joining me on this bonus cast. I've been your host, Diane. You take care now. Bye-bye.